In recent years, two Chinese fighter aircraft have emerged which have caused a stir in the West. The first is the fifth-generation J-20 Mighty Dragon, a rival to the F-35, F-22, and Su-57. The other is the J-16, a familiar-looking multirole aircraft. Based on the flanker, it's designed to match and outperform Western designs, like the Super Hornet and its Russian equivalents. The online chatter is increasingly touting this Chinese fighter as the ultimate flanker. But is this true? Today, let's have a look at the J-16. Before diving in, it is important to note that only a few details regarding this aircraft can be confirmed as fact, and most of what we are working with is speculation. As we have discussed in our other videos on PLAAF designs, China is arguably the most difficult country to find solid information about such aircraft, at least from a Western perspective. The language barrier, and more importantly, the rigid internet security in the country prohibits us from pinning down a lot of information. Only the Chinese designers themselves, and perhaps some Western intelligence agencies, have the full picture of these aircraft and capabilities. Nevertheless, let's work with what we have. Technically, the J-16 is still a flanker derivative, since it shares a similar airframe, hence its NATO reporting of flanker N. The aircraft bridges the gap between the Su-30 derivatives and the Su-35S air superiority fighter. In a previous video, we noted the advantages the Su-35S has over both the newer Su-30SM and older flanker variants when it comes to air-to-air capabilities. In essence, our conclusion was that the Su-35 is indeed the ultimate flanker within the realm of pure air-to-air prowess, whilst the Su-30SM-2 is likely Russia's best multi-role strike aircraft, maybe an equivalent to the latest Super Hornet or Strike Eagle. It is important to note that the PLAAF and PLAN do field both the advanced Su-35 and two variants of the Su-30. The Su-30MKK, or Flanker G, a Chinese modified export variant from the late 90s, and the Su-30MK2, or Flanker G+, a heavily upgraded export model intended for maritime use. All three of these aircraft, or at the very least the Su-35 and Su-30MK2, are highly adept for modern combat. Nevertheless, China has continually pushed for its own native derivatives. There are 5 key Chinese domestically produced derivatives of the flanker, all produced by Shenyang Aircraft Corporation. The first was the J-11, based on the Su-27 UBK. Beginning in 1997, Russian flanker manufacturer Napo sent assembly kits to China. By December 1998, the first airframes were complete, but Russian engineers who visited were shocked at the poor assembly quality and had to help rebuild them. However, by 2000, the same engineers reported the entire Chinese production process had improved dramatically. It was now both highly efficient and open to integrating domestically built technology. The Russians agreed, and in 2000 the newly named J-11A was put together. Still heavily reliant on Russian technology, it did integrate Chinese avionics. By 2004, China was producing its second primary variant of the flanker, the J-11B or Flanker L, a multi-role variant with the goal of moving away from reliance on Russia. Despite breaching intellectual property agreements with Russia, the project moved ahead, using the Su-27SK as its basis. These production aircraft would also serve as a type of testbed, with huge upgrade programs regularly occurring to overhaul systems with more and more Chinese tech. By 2011, the J-11B was using 90% Chinese systems, and by 2014 it was using the WS-10 Chinese engine. In 2006, a third major derivative would be built. Supposedly purchasing an incomplete Su-33 from Ukraine, Shenyang began development of a naval-based aircraft. The result was the J-15 Flying Shark, or Flanker X-2. Much like the Su-33, it is a carrier-capable multi-role aircraft and has become the primary fighter for the PLAN. In 2018, the fourth major derivative began testing. The J-15D, a twin-seat carrier-based derivative of the original J-15, which would have a focus on electronic warfare, drone control, and possibly recon. Then we come to the fifth major variant, the J-16 Flanker N. It would be a twin-seat design, feature multi-role capabilities, and aspire to outperform the J-11 in air-to-air and the J-15 in air-to-ground and electronic warfare roles, placing the J-16 in a rather unique position. The developmental history of the J-16 is not clear, but it likely took its maiden flight between 2011 and 2012, with the intention of replacing the twin-seat J-11B. Two primary variants would emerge: the standard J-16, or J-16A, primarily a multi-role aircraft, and the J-16D, an electronic warfare platform. Early on, the J-16 was perceived as the ultimate do-everything fighter by commentators, but this was probably overly optimistic. The J-16A is clearly a multi-role design. However, its development seems to follow the same principles as the Su-30 in Russia and the Super Hornet in the US, and probably a reasonable comparison with the F-15E. It's unlikely to outclass everything that's thrown at it, but rather it offers pilots a flexible platform for a wide variety of tasks. The J-16D is also a multi-role aircraft, with the key difference being a focus on electronic warfare. It will probably operate in a similar capacity to the J-15D, and thus most comparable to the EA-18G Growler. As of 2024, it was reported that 350 aircraft had been built, and that production was continuing at this rate. The production aircraft is outwardly very clearly a flanker, yet Chinese under the skin. Interestingly, the aircraft emerged during a period of tension between Russia and China over IP infringements with the flanker. The Russians were aware that the Chinese were breaching their agreements, and the level of modification done to the J-16 demonstrates the illegal latitude the Chinese took. Basically, the Chinese build their own flankers now, and there's probably not a lot Russia can or would do about it. The Chinese seem particularly proud of the J-16's electronic systems they have developed. Such development has been an important focus for Chinese aerospace lately. In our other video on the J-20, we noted that China, and South Korea with their KF-21, has put an emphasis on developing both single-seat and twin-seat aircraft, specifically to integrate more advanced digital networking systems. These include a more advanced data link system that links air and ground assets, shares information, transfers target acquisition data, as well as more advanced features like onboard drone control using standard drones, drone commanding for automated or loyal wingman-type drones, and control over advanced digital systems once relegated to large ground-based computers or ELINT aircraft. We are taking the following story with a grain of salt, but there might have been a demonstration of the Chinese countering an American EA-18 Growler. Chinese officers from the Navy claim that in 2022, during the Pelosi visit to Taiwan, when US carriers were deployed to the region, they encountered heavy jamming from US Growlers, and this was extremely effective at masking aircraft from radars completely. Essentially, Chinese aircraft and ships would drop lock on US aircraft once jamming began. However, in December 2023, a similar incident supposedly took place. A US and a Chinese naval group encountered each other in the South China Sea. The US sent out Growlers and Super Hornets to watch the Chinese, whilst the Chinese began locking up the aircraft and the Growlers started their electronic jamming, all rather routine for such an encounter. However, this time the Chinese radars reattained their lock on American assets, somehow burning through the Growlers' electronic efforts. Chinese naval officers claimed that they had successfully integrated AI algorithms that presumably help with data analysis to speed up burn-through time on jamming signals, and that this can in some way be expanded and exploited by pilots in the J-16. Again, we take this information with a grain of salt. There were two Chinese researchers who published a paper in July 2024 analyzing this encounter and insinuate that an AI system was used to network all available sensor information, including multiple radars, receivers, and so on, and crunches this data to generate an image of the battle space. All information is then shared via a networking system to air, sea, and land assets to form a more cohesive picture. This isn't anything new. The US has been doing this for some time, but Chinese advancements may be leveling the playing field in this regard. It's particularly interesting from the perspective of the J-16 directly competing with the Growler in the electronic warfare space. There are some other speculations about the J-16 and electronic warfare. The first is interlinking with the KJ-500, China's primary AWACS aircraft. Some commentators believe the J-16 doesn't yet have this feature, but we would say it is probably the one feature it almost certainly does have. Designers are unlikely to prioritize air-to-sea integration before AWACS linking, especially today. In modern air combat, data streams from AWACS aircraft are crucial, and we can presume this would be top priority from the data link side of development. Another focus is likely the successfully countering of naval air defenses. Perhaps the primary threat to naval aircraft is anti-air coverage from an opposing navy. Some modern warships possess radar systems better than those found on standard ground-based surface-to-air missile systems, and their coverage in the open seas is not obscured by terrain. China realizes that some of the most crucial confrontations in a major war would be over the ocean. For pilots today, a contested ocean is arguably more dangerous than a contested land region. Navy ships can saturate a large area with air defenses, and without terrain masking and corrected for atmospheric conditions, can receive extremely accurate returns from radars. Aircraft can attempt to counter this with stealth, long-range standoff anti-ship, or suppression of enemy air defenses weapons, or electronic warfare. The latter is the most advantageous, as it is cheaper than developing a dedicated stealth fighter, and can be scaled to accommodate new systems. Still along the lines of electronics, it has been reported that a J-16D was tested with an AI weapons systems officer. With just a single pilot in the front and an empty back seat, the tasks of the weapons systems officer were handled by an AI, which could also process other data in a way that a standard WSO couldn't possibly do. An interesting, but not surprising development, and something we've seen the US also working on. Given a twin-seat aircraft, we assume the ultimate situation would be a human WSO with AI assistance, essentially providing the equivalent of a three-man team in a single aircraft. One of the key differences between Chinese military aircraft development and other major powers such as Russia and the US is experience. The major Western powers and Russia have pioneered modern fighter aircraft, including the engines, radar, missile systems, and all the peripheral support equipment. These aircraft come from decades of experience, whereas China is playing catch-up as it's lacked such a depth of experience. An important area is the production of reliable jet turbines, something which the US, UK, and Russia can do because of decades of experience, yet China struggles. For this reason, it is impressive what China is doing. But will their designs have the rigidity, strength, longevity, and reliability that comes with experience? China is notorious for having the highest level of academic forgery in the world, and no doubt this spills over into the world of military aviation. Reverse engineering existing designs is likely a key leapfrog strategy for the CCP, and any Western criticism is a small price to pay to gain the upper hand on the battlefield. After all, this is the country that gave us Sun Tzu and the art of war. They play a different game to the West. This is a smart leadership using everything at their disposal to advance as quickly as possible to meet Western military standards. Chinese aircraft development and turnover is still happening at Cold War speeds, both impressive and problematic. We look back at the early Cold War era as a golden age in military aviation development, where technological leaps were the primary driver, not necessarily reliability or longevity. Also, the economy of the US during the 50s and 60s allowed for far greater risks to be taken in aerospace. China today may have a better economy than mainstream Western sources claim, but it is doubtful that it is anywhere close to the strength of 1950s America. Nevertheless, it seems to be on a similar developmental trajectory, albeit with the advantage of existing superior designs like the Russian flanker. In terms of specifications and capabilities, the J-16 does have some notable differences to other flanker derivatives. It is currently powered by two natively built WS-10B engines, one of China's primary domestic fighter engine, producing 33,000 pounds of thrust. These engines were initially based off the GEF-101, and early versions were noted as being unreliable after long use, something we have noted in other videos about Chinese fighters. However, the Bravo variant has supposedly overcome a lot of these challenges. Performance-wise, the J-16 has a max speed of Mach 2.0 and a service ceiling of 57,000 feet. Another difference to other flankers is weight. The J-16's empty weight is 38,600 pounds, with a max takeoff weight of 77,000 pounds. This empty weight is lighter than the Su-35, which weighs in at 41,800 pounds. This was achieved with composite materials, The aircraft's combat range is 1,500 kilometers and its ferry range is 4,500 kilometers. When it comes to weapons, it shares some commonalities with other flankers. For example, it has 12 external hardpoints, allowing it to carry a significant loadout if needed. This has always been a strength for these Sukhoi designs. The Chinese have, however, attempted to turn the aircraft into a platform for domestically designed weaponry. The J-16 likely has the most impressive arsenal of any aircraft in the PLA Air Force because of this focus on integration. For air-to-air engagements, the J-16 fields several legacy Chinese domestic missiles, the PL-9, an infrared missile comparable to older variants of the Sidewinder, and the PL-12, an active radar missile comparable to the AMRAAM. It also integrates two rather unique domestically built missiles. The first is the PL-10, a short-range missile which can be employed using classic infrared homing or combining infrared signature data with optical shape detection for stronger immunity to countermeasures. It also integrates active radar to provide lock-on after launch capabilities. This missile is comparable to the IRIS-T or AIM-9X, integrating the ability to slave the seeker head to a helmet-mounted display and lock targets in off-bore sight acquisition, supposedly beyond 90 degrees from the head-up display. The second is the PL-15, which has been described as a type of long-range active radar-guided standoff weapon, much like Russia's R-77-1 or the US AIM-260. Equipped with a micro-AESA radar, the missile can be employed actively without a data stream from the aircraft, like most Fox 3 missiles today. However, it can be launched in a passive tracking mode. It is unclear whether this passive mode refers to a standard track-while-scan soft lock, which requires the firing aircraft to hold lock, which wouldn't be particularly surprising, or whether the missile will have the ability to passively track targets without requiring guidance data from the host aircraft. If it is the latter, that would be a major advantage, and this seems to be in line with what Chinese designers have been obsessing over for years. The classic disadvantage with track-while-scan acquisition is that once the firing aircraft breaks lock with its targets, the fired missiles will switch on radars to active mode, which alerts enemy aircraft of their presence. The claim is that the PL-15 is Mach 5 capable and operable up to a range of 200 kilometers. In Ukraine, we have already seen an air-to-air kill at 100 kilometers, using what was reported to be an R-77-1, whilst Ukrainian pilots have also complained about having to pull back from operations to counter R-37 hypersonic missiles being launched at similar ranges. Thus, we know that these longer-range missiles are now being employed on the battlefield. However, it is obviously quite a jump from a 100-kilometer capable standoff missile to 200 kilometers. Over the past decade, China has had success in designing highly advanced long-range missiles, including hypersonics and other kinetic energy weapons, and may have had equivalent success in the world of air-to-air munitions. In terms of air-to-ground, it seems the J-16 sports a variety of laser-guided, unguided, and perhaps GPS-guided bombs, air-to-ground missiles, rocket pods, anti-ship missiles, and anti-radiation missiles. Also, the J-16D comes equipped with distinct wingtip-mounted modules for electronic warfare use. There is not much confirmed information about the J-16's radar. In its role, it should preferably have a radar that can at least match the Super Hornets, since that will be its most likely adversary. Whether or not this is the case is anyone's guess. It is claimed that China's modern AESA radars use gallium nitride compounds rather than older gallium arsenide, giving a higher power density. It is possible, but note that US manufacturers, who are far more experienced than those in China, have themselves not fully embraced gallium nitride. Interestingly, someone online has noted that anyone can purchase gallium nitride transmit-receive modules from Alibaba for consumer purposes. This probably doesn't directly translate to successful military application, but it does suggest that Chinese manufacturers are quickly adopting to what they think is the next step up in radar technology. It is also speculated that the J-16's radar will be a larger, more advanced variant or iteration of that used in the JF-17. This may not be true, since the JF-17 is an export fighter and probably doesn't have the latest Chinese technology. Even so, the speculation is that the JF-17's radar has a synthetic aperture resolution of below 1 meter, and so the J-16's radar, possibly twice as large and more advanced, would likely have an even greater resolution. When it comes to radars, the bar has been set pretty high by the latest Western designs. The APG-81 used in the F-35 has a particularly high fidelity, with official images showing trucks in a field, even rendering the tire tracks visible in the grass. This suggests a synthetic aperture clarity of around 20 centimeters. Could Shenyang match this? It is possible, but the F-35 has set the bar extremely high from what we've seen. Beyond radar, the J-16 integrates other sensor systems. As with most flankers, it features an electro-optical system for target acquisition. This system is on some US fighters and common on Russian and European designs. In the past, this was good primarily in visual range situations. However, over time, the capability of EO systems has improved. On the Typhoon, for example, is said to be able to acquire aircraft at 100 kilometers, and the Su-35 supposedly can spot and track targets over 50 kilometers away. The obvious advantage here is that the EO systems allow for target lock without giving the target the heads up via their radar warning receiver alerts. On that note, in terms of radar warning receiver capabilities, the J-16 seems a bit different. Most modern flankers, as well as the Su-57, integrate threat warning suites which are combined into a single sensor system. The Su-35S and Su-57 use missile approach warning systems, or MAWS, that cover a large portion of the airframe and can detect objects optically, through infrared or through other imaging envelopes. European fighters also use a similar system, with decent coverage around the airframe. The J-16, on the other hand, seems to have only rear MAWS coverage, presumably because infrared threats would primarily present themselves from behind the aircraft. The US is slowly integrating the new Eagle Passive Active Warning Survivability System, or EPAWS. This system allows for 360-degree radar warning receiver coverage with an accuracy of detection of a few degrees. Some claims have it as low as 1 degree. Classic radar warning receiver accuracy of tens of degrees has usually been fine when trying to escape threats, since the general direction is all that is necessary. However, the EPAWS system gives pilots the ability to actively counter these threats. We can imagine that Growler pilots, or those in other electronic warfare-capable aircraft, could use this hyperdirectional information to direct electronic warfare systems for jamming and suppressing enemy defenses. In fact, a claimed use of the EPAWS is direct integration with air-to-ground weapons, presumably allowing radar warning receiver data to be directly translated into a computer-calculated release point. We can speculate that the designers at Shenyang and their contractors are working on a system similar to EPAWS for integration into the J-16, and possibly the reason the J-16 seems to have less of a focus on optical and infrared systems. When we ask the question, is the J-16 the ultimate flanker? There's a lot to consider. It is highly possible the J-16 is better than the Su-30 variants, and closer to the Su-35 in terms of pure fighting ability, thanks to the use of composites and newer digital systems, which is remarkable if true, given that the J-16 is a multirole aircraft. The Chinese have made great advances in the digital space. They excel in replicating existing designs and adding improvements, and are rapidly gaining ground. But maybe the reason the J-16 may be one of the best flankers is because it is a flanker to start with. Without the Russian flanker as a starting point, it is debatable whether Chinese designers could have created an equivalent native aircraft from scratch. Nevertheless, the J-16 is surely an impressive aircraft. Maybe not the most dominant Chinese fighter. That's probably the J-11D derived from the Su-27, but certainly a good all-round multi-role aircraft, rather like the Super Hornet, and the J-16D clearly a competitor to the EA-18 Growler. It will be interesting to see what China does with these new flanker derivatives. We speculate that Shenyang will move more towards a US-based approach to air combat and air power, being more digital and network-oriented. This will be interesting to see, essentially flanker airframes with American-style systems, but only time will tell. Thanks for watching, and if you appreciate what we are doing, please subscribe and support us by checking out our merchandise shop.